Allahu Akbar!
Hamas has committed war crimes, and the whole world knows that. But there is evidence to show that Israel too bloodied its hands with the blood of innocents. This is the reason why the United Nations says it is collecting evidence of war crimes by both sides in the Israel-Hamas war. The war that began with the militant group's brutal October 7th cross-border attack and was followed by Israel's relentless bombardment and a siege of Gaza. At least 1,400 Israelis and more than 10,000 people in Gaza have been killed, and thousands of others have been injured. Most of the injured and the dead are civilians, including many women and children. Enforcing the law amid the fog of war is difficult. Holding perpetrators to account once conflicts are over has often proved to be elusive. Here is a look at some of the issues. Firstly, what are the rules of the war? The rules of armed conflict are governed by a set of internationally recognized laws and resolutions, including the UN Charter, which prohibits wars of aggression but allows countries to defend themselves. And this is exactly what Israel keeps claiming. Battlefield behavior is governed by international humanitarian laws, including the Geneva Conventions, which were drawn up after World War II and agreed to by almost every nation. The 4 conventions agreed upon in 1949 set out that civilians, the wounded, and prisoners must be treated humanely in wartime. They ban murder, torture, hostage-taking, and humiliating and degrading treatment, and also require fighters to treat the other side's sick and wounded. The conventions initially dealt with the behavior of combatants. They were updated later to set out rules for the treatment of civilians in the war zones. Civilian deaths aren't necessarily war crimes, but civilians must not be targeted deliberately or indiscriminately, and military operations must be proportionate. Another key law governing war is the Roman Statute that established the International Criminal Court to prosecute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also genocide. It holds that international attacks targeting civilians, civilian settlements, and humanitarian workers, also the destruction of property where not militarily necessary, sexual violence, and unlawful deportation are war crimes. International agreements ban certain weapon types, such as chemical and biological munitions. Most, but not all countries have signed up to these. Now, the other question is, has Hamas committed war crimes? Well, Hamas has fired thousands of rockets at Israeli towns and cities, and on October 7th, it sent hundreds of gunmen across the border from Gaza. They attacked and killed civilians, including children and retirees, in their homes and neighborhoods, and kidnapped scores of others. Israel says at least 1,400 people died and more than 240 others were abducted. Roughly 5,400 people in Israel have also been injured since the war started. Haim Abraham, a lecturer of law at University College London, said that the evidence of crime is very clear. They say that they massacred civilians at their homes, they kidnapped civilians, taking them hostage. All of these things are clearly war crimes. Janine Sulzer, a lawyer with the Commission for International Justice of Amnesty International France, said the Geneva Convention states that civilians should never be taken hostage. If they are, that may be characterized as a war crime. So what Hamas has done can be categorized as war crime. Now, the question that arises is, has Israel's response been legal? Well, the Israeli military has pounded Hamas-ruled Gaza with airstrikes, blocked deliveries of food, water, fuel, and electricity, and told people to leave northern Gaza for the southern part of the strip. The Gaza Health Ministry says more than 9,200 Palestinians, and in fact the updated number is 10,000 Palestinians, have been killed in Gaza so far, mostly women and children, and more than 23,000 people have been wounded during the weeks of Israeli bombardment. Critics accuse Israel of collectively punishing Gaza's 2 million residents. Hundreds of thousands have heeded Israel's warning and fled south in hope of escaping the fighting. After weeks of heavy bombardment, Israel sent in ground troops, and they have encircled Gaza city. Israel has allowed limited humanitarian aid, but not fuel, to cross southern Gaza from Egypt. This is causing a huge humanitarian crisis. The International Committee of the Red Cross has said that the Israeli instruction for hundreds of thousands of people to leave their homes, coupled with the complete siege, explicitly denying them food, water, and electricity, are not compatible with international humanitarian law. The Israeli army says it follows international law and strikes only legitimate military target as it seeks to root out militants who it claims are embedded themselves among the civilian population. The Geneva Convention forbid the use of medical facilities to hide military units and the use of civilians as human shields, both of which Israel claims Hamas does. In such cases, it may be legal to attack areas where civilians are present, which means if the hospitals were attacked because there were militants underneath it, as Israel claims, then it might be legal. As with much of warfare law, the rights and wrongs are disputed and could be tested in courts. But that rarely happens. Palestinian civilians have died in strikes on residential buildings, including in southern areas where they were told to go by Israel itself. An October 31st strike on the Jabalia refugee camp on the outskirts of Gaza City killed a senior Hamas commander, but also killed dozens of civilians. So is that a war crime or not? The laws of war say medical facilities should not be targeted. Hospitals have been hit by blasts during the current conflict, including a deadly October 17th explosion at the Al Ahli Arab Hospital that led to international calls for a war crimes investigation. There were conflicting accusations of who was responsible for the hospital blast, with Hamas officials in Gaza blaming an Israeli airstrike and Israel saying it was caused by an errant rocket launched by Palestinian militants. US, British, and French intelligence services also concluded it was likely caused by a misfired rocket. An Associated Press analysis of the video, photos, and the satellite imagery, as well as consultation with experts, showed the cause was likely a rocket launched from Palestinian territory that misfired in the air and crashed to the ground and hit the hospital. However, a definitive conclusion could not be reached. There have also been conflicting accounts of the blast's death toll. Gaza officials initially said 500 people were killed. US officials said the number was likely between 100 and 300. The human rights groups Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have accused Israel of using munitions containing white phosphorus also. This inflammatory substance is not banned, but its use in densely populated areas has been widely condemned. Israel maintains that it uses these munitions only as a smokescreen and not to target civilians. Its military said in a statement last month that the main type of smokescreen shells it uses do not contain white phosphorus, but it didn't rule out its use in some situations. Now the question is, can lawbreakers be held to account? A UN Commission of Inquiry said it was collecting and preserving evidence of war crimes committed by all sides in the current conflict. That evidence could be added to an ongoing investigation by the International Criminal Court into the situation in the Palestinian territories. The Netherlands-based ICC has the power to prosecute nations' officials for violations and order compensation for victims. But some countries, including the United States, Russia, and Israel, do not recognize the court's jurisdiction, and the ICC does not have a police force to execute arrest warrants, as we have seen in Putin's case, against whom there is an arrest warrant. Now the question is, are there any other routes? Although the ICC is the only permanent international tribunal set up to prosecute war crimes, other international courts, including the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights, can hear cases related to alleged violations. So can domestic courts in Israel or elsewhere. Under US law, American victims could try to bring claims for compensation against Hamas in the US courts. As with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the prospect of prosecuting war crimes in the current conflict seems remote. But Amnesty International's Sulza says legal initiatives are already a reality. She said French national and dual citizen victims of the Hamas attacks have already filed complaints in French courts. Breaches of international law can also trigger sanctions, such as those imposed on Russia by the United States, the European Union, and others over the invasion of Ukraine. And in rare cases, they can draw UN-authorized military intervention. But the question still remains, how can these be proved even if they are war crimes? And who will bring justice to the victims as the war continues? Do tell us what you think about this video in the comment section. And for more news updates, subscribe to India Today.